Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dustin Huffman with the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. We all know that 2022 is an election year, and in Iowa, it's especially important as we pick a candidate for governor. Now, we decided to reach out to all the campaigns of the governor candidates and ask them the same ag related questions. We talked about rural prosperity, the future of biofuels, and what future agriculture plays in cleaning up air and water quality in the state. Each candidate received the questions, had the same amount of time to answer, and here's what they had to say on each topic.
Hi, I'm Rick Stewart, and I am running for Iowa governor with the Libertarian Party. I'm a native Iowan. My great-great-grandfather came here in 1853, and I've got kids and grandkids. That's 7 generations of Iowa. So you can't really get the Iowa out of my blood. I'm a Iowa entrepreneur. I started a company that is a $200 million company today. It employs 600 people. I was law enforcement officer in my first career. And since I retired early, when I was only 49 years old, I've started dabbling in politics. And the reason I did that is because I got tired of sitting around and complaining instead of doing something about it. I'm a doer. I'm not just somebody that sits around and whines. So here I am. I'm running for Iowa governor. It's not my first race, but it's a good one. I've had a great time, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. Prosperity is a word that, first of all, has to be defined, and usually it's defined by lots of people and lots of money. You don't get that unless you have lots of jobs. So rural prosperity in Iowa right now, unfortunately, is sort of divided into 2 classes. The farmers are doing very well, especially when the price of corn and beans is up. And the rest of the population that isn't involved in the farming operations and the ag businesses, they aren't doing that well. There aren't that many jobs in these small Iowa towns. I've driven through probably 200 small Iowa towns just in the last month or two, and some of them look pretty good. They look prosperous. They got downtowns. They're bustling. A lot of cars. And others, I'm sad to say, but they definitely look like they're on the decline. They sort of hit the ropes. There's no solution to this problem unless you want to just move people into the cities or the towns and say, hey, you live here now. And we're obviously not going to do that. My challenge to small Iowa towns is this. You have to figure out how to attract people to live there. And there is no secret to that. There's no silver bullet, I should say. You just have to figure it out on your own. And I don't have any suggestions. I'm not smart enough to know how you attract people to rural Iowa towns, but I can make some suggestions that have been successful in other places. One of them is you got to have a good coffee shop. And as much as I respect Casey's, I'm not talking about Casey's. I'm talking about a modern coffee shop where people go in and sit down and talk to each other and enjoy a refreshing cup of coffee. So that's one thing I've noticed that seems to be very successful in towns. Another one is you got to have a good bar. And I'm not talking about one where they have 25-cent draws at 5 o'clock on Thursdays. I'm talking about one that is more progressive. Let's put it that way. They have a wider variety of beer and a little bit, more convivial entertainment, I should say. It's the kind of place that draws in people that have money to spend and they want to go someplace and spend it well. So I don't have a secret to that, reviving our rural towns. But I will say this: it's been done, and I'm the kind of guy who always says, if somebody else is doing something well, I just go copy it. I have a lot of ideas, but I steal them all. So I would go and copy the towns that are doing it well, because whatever they're doing, I would try and do that. And good luck. I think it's very possible, but it won't happen unless the people in those towns do it themselves. Well, you're asking a question about how the government should be involved in our energy policy. My answer, I'm a libertarian. The government shouldn't be involved at all in any of our energy industries, biofuel, ethanol, oil, gas, windmills, or anything. It's not the job of the government to figure out how to provide energy at the best quality and the lowest price to the people who want to buy it. That's the private industry's job, and they're fantastic at it. Okay, America is the richest country in the world because we've allowed private industry to create jobs compete against each other in a level playing field in a competitive market. And the winners win and the losers lose. And over the course of time, we have a lot of winners and we don't have very many losers. So biofuels to me aren't special. I know they're produced here in Iowa, and hey, I love it. It's fantastic. We've got all kinds of biofuel production here in Iowa, but it's not the government's job to promote that. It's the private market's job to promote that. It may be that biofuels are going to save the world from climate change. And it may be that we have to get rid of them because they're what's causing climate change. I don't know, but I do know this. The market knows. The market knows so much more than the government that I will never attempt to inflict my views of what should happen on the free market, because I'm just one guy. And what we need in a free market is we need everybody trying to do the best they can to make a profit in that market, competing against their fellow producers in a competitive environment with no monopolies and no government intervention. And when that happens, then we will find out just how important biofuels are. So let's get rid of all the subsidies. I'm not just talking about biofuels. I'm talking about the oil subsidies and the gas subsidies and the windmill subsidies and the solar subsidies. Get rid of all the subsidies. If we want to worry about the environment, there's only one way to do it intelligently and efficiently. And that's with a carbon tax. Okay, I know you don't want to tax. I don't want to tax. But if you want to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and the amount of methane in the atmosphere, there's only one way to do it. And that's you got to tax it. If you don't want something, you tax it. You don't tax things that you want, you tax things that you don't want. So if we'll put a carbon tax in, I'm not promoting a carbon tax. I'm explaining what you have to do if you want to reduce carbon emissions. If you put a carbon tax in, then that money should flow right back to the consumers on a per capita basis. The producers will produce less carbon, the consumers will buy less carbon, and there will only be a transfer from carbon producing to non-carbon producing people. It's simple. Well, that's a great question. And in fact, my solution, which I presented 4 years ago, I've never found anybody who didn't agree with me on this. At least if they didn't agree, they never said that. Water quality is determined by the quality of the watersheds. And Iowa has about 21 watersheds. It's where the water flows into a river and it flows downhill and it exits somewhere either in Missouri or into the Mississippi or the Missouri rivers. You have to think about water quality with respect to that because it's not an ag question, it's a landowner question. Water only falls on land. And the person who owns that land has a responsibility. Their responsibility is don't pollute. Nobody is allowed to pollute. You can't throw your trash onto your neighbor's yard, and you can't ship your dirty water down the neighbor's river either. If you're a landowner, water can be a pollution. Not saying it is, I'm just saying it can be. And your responsibility is to make sure that it isn't. So let's put a meter at the end of every watershed in Iowa. Let's let every watershed form a co-op. In fact, let's insist that they form a co-op. And that co-op's got one single instruction. The water coming out of your watershed has to be just as clean as the water that came, that came into your watershed. So if the water came from the rain, it has to be as clean as the rain. If the water came from upstream, let's just say Minnesota, then it has to be as clean as Minnesota shipped it to you. And I don't care how you make that water clean. The only thing I care about is that water clean? What I trust is the co-op, which will be composed of every landowner, not just farmers. I mean, of course, the farmers are going to be members of the co-op because they own a lot of land. But I'm going to be a member of the co-op too because I own a little plot inside the city, and the water from above, it rains on me too. I don't know where anybody lives that it doesn't ever rain. And I have a responsibility that my water is clean. Maybe my city helps me take care of that responsibility. I don't know. I know I built a rain garden last year specifically so that my water that comes off my roof doesn't flow directly into the storm sewer, but it flows into my rain garden. And farmers have to figure out for themselves how they can make their water clean. It's all done with meters. These meters are dirt cheap. I don't think they cost more than $1 a piece. You put one at the bottom of the river, and maybe the co-op's going to have one at the bottom of every runoff in a farm. I don't know. What I do know is co-ops are a fantastic way for people who have a common problem, water quality, to solve that problem by cooperation and not by the force of the government, because the government's never going to fix that. Well, let's start with eminent domain for private gain. That is absolutely unconscionable. Iowa does have an eminent domain provision in its constitution, but it isn't there to protect, I should say it isn't there so that private investors can make profit by having the government confiscate land from them. I'm also a libertarian. We don't believe in using force to achieve our objectives. And so if a farmer owns some property, or if I own some property, and the government wants to use it, there's only one way that the government should get to use it, and that's called pay for it. Now, sometimes the farmer wants to sell, let's just say for $10,000, and the government only wants to pay $5,000. Well, tough luck for the government, isn't it? Because the price is $10,000. And no Iowa farmer and no Iowa landowner should ever have their land confiscated by government action. Now, in the particular case this year, it's so egregious, it's hard to imagine. But, you know, these pipelines are probably dubious value. The only way that they're going to ever make any money is with the federal tax credits. In other words, they would never even be considered if it weren't for the fact that the federal government is trying to bribe these pipeline companies to make the pipelines, because they claim that they'll reduce CO2 emissions in the air or in the output source by collecting that CO2 and shipping it somewhere else. Well, that's, you know, I'm not the scientist, but let's just say, okay, that's not true. These CO2 collection systems have never been successful. There's an incredible amount of danger in them, because CO2, of course, will kill you if you breathe too much of it, and you can't see it, so you don't even know it's killing you. But there's also just, it's an economic boondoggle. If it weren't for the plan that the government passed, which they call the Inflation Reduction Act for some unknown reason, these things wouldn't even exist. So I will not allow any private landowner in Iowa to have their land confiscated simply because the government, or I shouldn't say this, because the private companies would like to have their land or would like to have access to their land. That's just unconscionable. There's a couple of other things I'd just like to touch on, and mental health is one of them. But right now in Iowa, we have 71 veterans a year commit suicide, probably because they have PTSD. There is a miraculous medicine for PTSD. It's called MDMA, assisted therapy. Unfortunately, that is illegal. I just want to remind you of something. Cocaine is legal in Iowa. Methamphetamine is legal in Iowa. Opioids are legal in Iowa. Of course, you have to have a prescription, but you can get one, and it's legal to have these and use them as medicine. MDMA is not even legal in Iowa, when it's a miraculous drug that can have a 65% success rate at stopping PTSD. If we stand by while our veterans die, we are not standing for Iowa values. We need to change that. We need to change that as soon as possible, hopefully long before I'm the governor.